I'm Dr. Joshua Reichard, President and CEO of Omega Graduate School, and this is a tutorial on developing your PhD DPhil prospectus. At OGS, we have historically referred to the prospectus as a pre-proposal, and it's a pre-proposal because it is what comes before your proposal. Your proposal is a fully developed chapters 1 through 3 of your dissertation. So the first 3 of 5 chapters of your dissertation. Your prospectus should be about 7 to 10 pages in length, and you will eventually flesh out those 7 to 10 pages and develop them into chapters 1 through 3 as you work towards developing a full proposal. The goal of the prospectus is for you to develop a clear, concise roadmap for your entire dissertation research. Take your time to get all of the elements of the prospectus right, because your prospectus will guide you through the rest of your dissertation. At the heart of the development of your prospectus is alignment. Ensuring alignment of all of the elements of what will eventually become your dissertation is critical to ensuring that you have a solid plan to move forward. First, you need to determine your methodology, either quantitative or qualitative. And from your methodology, you choose your research design. OGS supports 2 quantitative research designs, either quasi-experimental, that's examining statistically significant difference between 2 groups, or correlational, that's examining a statistically significant relationship between 2 continuous variables. And for qualitative, we support only 1 design, and that's the basic qualitative design. You'll need to ensure that your problem statement is clear and concise. What are you researching and why? Why is it a problem? Your purpose statement. What are you trying to accomplish in this study? Your instruments. How will you measure your variables? Your research questions. What questions is your study trying to answer? Your hypotheses, and that's for the quantitative designs. How will you test your variables? Population and sampling. Who are your participants and how will you recruit them? And your data analysis plan. How will you test your hypotheses or analyze your data? Let's look at some of the elements of the prospectus template together. Starting with the problem statement, we encourage you to use the exact wording that we've provided here and simply plug in your own language where appropriate. This will help ensure alignment and proper formatting of your eventual proposal and dissertation. So for the problem statement, we want you to state it like this. The problem is, state the problem, among, name your participants, because, why is it a problem, and include at least 1 citation to justify that problem statement. Problem statement should be 1 clear, concise sentence. From your problem statement, you can derive a purpose statement. The purpose of this study is to either examine or explore. Use the verb examine for quantitative designs. Use the verb explore for qualitative designs. And finish that sentence. You'll then develop a very brief review of literature which explains the background of the problem that you are examining or exploring. And you'll cite some literature there to justify why, in fact, it is a problem. So this will be the most essay-like component of the prospectus. And from that background of the problem, you'll state the significance of your study. This study will contribute to a gap in the research or a gap in the literature of whatever the issue is you're examining or exploring by identifying something based on your research questions, which we will discuss next. Your research questions should follow specific formats as well. For quantitative designs, your research questions should read something like this. For a correlational study, for example, what is the relationship between one continuous variable and another continuous variable among your participants? Or for a quasi-experimental design, what differences exist between two groups among participants? So maybe males and females, or two different denominational groups. And for qualitative studies, your research questions should read like this. What are the perceptions of, and name your participants, regarding whatever issue you are exploring? Or how do your participants describe the issue in a certain situation or organization? Concerning research questions, make sure that they do not have a yes or no answer. So we should be using words like what and how rather than asking a question, is there or does. We should leave the research questions relatively open-ended. In the next section, you will specifically state and justify your chosen research methodology. So you can use a format like what is provided in the template. This study will utilize a quantitative methodology because hypotheses derived from research questions will be tested using statistical analysis. And then you can flesh that out with a few more sentences. In like manner, for a qualitative design, this study will utilize a qualitative methodology because research questions will be answered through inductive coding and exploratory thematic analysis. You can flesh that out as well. A major part of your Chapter 2, which will be your literature review, is justifying the theoretical or conceptual framework for your study. So that is a theory that anchors your study in the literature, and that should be a sociological theory. And of course, at OGS, we encourage you to integrate theological perspectives with that as well. But state very concisely here in the template, this study is framed by name the theory, because, justify it, and cite it. And this could be a few paragraphs long, but eventually you'll do extensive research around your theoretical framework within Chapter 2 of your dissertation. In your prospectus, you will also preliminarily state the intended instrumentation that you will use for your study. For quantitative designs, we encourage you to use a validated survey instrument in the spirit of social science research that measures attitudes, knowledge, or beliefs, or even behaviors, and state that very clearly. This study will utilize the blank instrument, which measures whatever variables or latent variables are measured in that instrument, using, and then even state the subscales if those are provided, and cite that instrument from the literature. If you are doing a qualitative study, generally qualitative studies emerge from the literature review. The instruments emerge from the literature review. And researchers develop their own instruments, generally a questionnaire, an interview protocol, or a focus group protocol. So you can state something like, this study will utilize a field-tested, researcher-developed questionnaire or interview protocol or focus group protocol validated by feedback from 5 to 7 subject matter experts. And that's essentially what a field test is for a qualitative instrument. You will send it to 5 to 7 subject matter experts of your own choosing who will review your instrument and its questions, provide feedback, and then you'll revise the instrument accordingly. And as long as you show that you have done that process, you can consider your instrument validated for qualitative research purposes. In the next section of the prospectus template, you will justify your research design. So remember, your research design follows your stated research methodology. So for quantitative methodology, there are 2 possible designs you can choose from, quasi-experimental or correlational. Quasi-experimental designs compares differences in a continuous dependent variable between groups split on one or more independent variables from a validated instrument. And this is essentially a deductive process. So you would state something like this. This quantitative study will utilize a quasi-experimental design because it will examine blank scores between group 1 and group 2 for a statistically significant difference among and your participants. So essentially, in quasi-experimental designs, you would administer the instrument to all of your participants and then split those participants into groups for comparison based on demographic factors. That could be things like race or ethnicity or religious affiliation or whether or not they participated in a particular program. And you would compare the scores between those groups. For a correlational design, you are examining the relationship between two continuous variables within the same group from a validated instrument. So here, the correlation is not necessarily between two groups, but between two variables. So you may have two different constructs on the same instrument, or you may even use two different instruments and look for a relationship, a correlation between the scores on those two instruments or between those two constructs. So you would state something like this. This quantitative study will utilize a correlational design because it will examine the relationship between variable 1 and variable 2 among your participants. Now, for a qualitative design, you're exploring emergent themes from open-ended participant responses. So that's why we have open-ended questionnaires or an interview protocol where participants are able to freely express themselves. And you would state something like this. This qualitative study will utilize a basic qualitative design because it will explore perceptions of whatever the issue is you're exploring among your participants. You will include a brief section in your prospectus regarding your plans for your population and your sampling method. This will be fleshed out in detail in Chapter 3 and is very important as you move towards securing Institutional Review Board IRB approval, deeming your fully developed proposal, Chapters 1 through 3, as sufficiently protecting the rights of human subjects. And that, of course, is very important for ethical concerns in social science research. But for now, we just need you to name your target population and say who they are, maybe where they're located, what organization they're affiliated with. And that's why there's an in, at, or from statement. And then you can name a geographic region or a particular organization or church. And that's sufficient for the prospectus. When you get to the actual development of Chapter 3, we will recommend that you use what's called purposive sampling, which is based on inclusion-exclusion criteria. So you're going to state what makes a person eligible to participate in your study. And you can combine that with what's called snowball sampling if you're not recruiting directly from a particular organization or if you have permission to use a mailing list or something like that. Snowball sampling simply allows you to post a recruitment letter to social media and ask other people to share it on your behalf. And that really helps to overcome some of the hurdles in the recruitment process for participants in your study. For quantitative designs, you may not be able to achieve a large enough sample to have normal data or data that meet certain assumptions that are required to conduct parametric procedures. And parametric simply means that your results can apply to the whole population. If you can't recruit enough participants, that's okay. You can simply revert to non-parametric procedures, and for every parametric procedure in statistics, there is a non-parametric equivalent. And that simply means that your study only applies to the sample and not to the population. And that's okay for a dissertation. And for qualitative designs, it's more of an arbitrary goal, and we encourage you to aim for 15 to 20 participants, which should help you reach what's called data saturation as you're analyzing those qualitative data. For quantitative designs, you will draft preliminary hypotheses in your prospectus. Now, for each research question, you should have a pair of hypotheses, a null and an alternate hypothesis. Remember, what we're actually testing in socioscientific research is the null hypothesis. So the burden is on us as the researcher to reject the null hypothesis, not necessarily to prove the conjecture or the hypothesis that we have formulated. That's why it's called the alternate hypothesis. So generally speaking, the null hypothesis should read something like this for a quasi-experimental design. No statistically significant difference exists in, whatever the measure is, between blank and blank groups among your participants. And of course, the alternate hypothesis is the opposite. A statistically significant difference exists in whatever the measure is between group 1, group 2 among participants. For correlational designs, the hypothesis should read something like this. No statistically significant relationship exists between variable 1 and variable 2 among participants. And the same for the alternate hypothesis. A statistically significant relationship exists between variable 1 and variable 2 among participants. The last component of the prospectus is developing a preliminary data analysis plan. Generally speaking, you can use the language that we've provided in the template and then flesh it out a little bit. But for quantitative designs, it would read something like this. This study will test data for normality and relevant assumptions of appropriate statistical procedures, and that's to determine whether or not you can use parametric or non-parametric procedures. If data do not meet assumptions for parametric procedures, that is, results applying to the population, non-parametric procedures, results applying only to the sample, will be utilized. So, as an example, for a correlational design, this study will utilize Pearson's product moment of correlation as a parametric test, or Spearman's rank correlation as a non-parametric test, to test the hypotheses for statistically significant relationships. And for a quasi-experimental design, it would read something like this. This study will utilize a t-test, parametric, or a Mann-Whitney-U procedure, non-parametric, to test hypotheses for statistically significant differences. For qualitative designs, we encourage you to use Creswell and Poth's data analysis spiral for data analysis. And at OGS, we encourage you to do manual coding, just using simple tools like Microsoft Word. And there is a 5-step process involved in Creswell and Poth's data spiral, and we've provided it there on the template for you. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you with some tips for success. First and foremost, please use our recommended template language for all elements to ensure alignment. Many of the transition words and conjunctions that we use in those sentences are very carefully chosen. So use the language that we have provided for you, and that will help ensure alignment. Remember to use the verb examine for quantitative studies and explore for qualitative studies. Do not try to address more than one construct in each research question. So don't say something like, what are the attitudes, opinions, and beliefs? Just choose one of those and focus on that for each research question. Also remember, research questions should not have a yes or no answer. Use words like how and what. Ensure your hypotheses align with your research questions. So again, for each research question, there should be corresponding null and alternate hypotheses. And if I can leave you with one suggestion, you hear me say this a lot at OGS, it's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, scholar. The more simple you keep your study, the more manageable it will be. And simplicity is actually a mark of scholarship. Being able to hone your research questions and ensure that you really know what you're studying and why, and being able to refine your hypotheses and carefully and concisely identify your hypotheses and variables and statistical procedures is a mark of scholarship. So keep it simple, scholar, and enjoy the process of developing your prospectus.